Okay, hey everyone, and welcome back to Open Finance Successes. Today for our podcast, we've got a special guest, Heather Xiao, who will be talking to us as we think through what's going to be the rest of this year looking like in the open banking, open finance space, with our regular guests, David, José Luis, and Mariana. Hi all.
Hello.
Hello.
Heather, welcome. Thanks for joining us as our special guest today. Do you want to start by sharing a little bit about your open banking journey for us?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you, Mark. I really appreciate you inviting me. I feel honored, and yeah, so good to see you guys here. And so I started my open banking journey actually from me working in the technology space. So I used to be the head of API in Qantas Airways back in Australia. So at that time there was open APIs and connecting to different airlines and airlines sharing their one world experience. So from there, I got into this open concept, and I love that open concept. So that helped me to transition into open banking. And as we know, UK started open banking about 6 years ago. And at that time, I was still in Australia, working with Australian banks in open banking. And then I came back to the UK about 4 years ago in 2019. So I started working on open banking with Standard Chartered as their head of API banking for Europe. And so that gave me a very good overview about how banks react to the open banking. Because it's very different from different stakeholders in this ecosystem. And after that, I worked with OBL, and it was known as OBIE before, so the UK Open Banking implementation entity. So I was their director of product operations, responsible for the resilience and operation of the product, and also the trust framework and the ecosystem development. And as you know, last year in the UK, it was a very busy time for open banking. I mean, this year also, but last year we have been working with JOC, the regulatory entities, on defining. I was part of the group to help defining what the future entity should look like for open banking for the UK. And also, I was working with as part of Smart Data Council to help looking at how open banking can evolve into open finance and smart data, open new sectors of data to basically to help the open data sharing economy much better serving the digital economy. Yeah, so it has been a very, very busy year. And this year, early on, probably a couple of months now ago, I decided to become independent. So now I opened my new company called Horizon Zero. And my company look at the strategy of open banking and open data and help the ecosystem to flourish. So that's my background.
Fantastic. Great to have you here. And it's excellent to hear your journey from seeing the benefits of sort of the interconnected openness to now being, situating yourself as an advocate of open banking, but beyond that into open data and open economy. I know that's a topic, Mariana, that you're very interested in. You've just written a blog post, a LinkedIn post recently talking about the move to an open economy. We'll spend this podcast talking about where we think the future is going. I'll open up to everyone, starting maybe with Mariana. Do you think how soon is that open economy and the greater use of data? Is this the year, or is this the setup year for next year?
I would say it's a setup year because many countries are advancing in their open banking, open finance journeys, but they are still many countries are still in very early stages, like discussing what kind of approach they're going to implement, how far authorities should be involved in some cases, because we know that most of the countries already are right now are market driven, right? So many countries are already talking about this. Many others have already planned how they are going to implement this, whether it's with regulation or some kind of participation of authorities, but leaving the industry to push it, or already having issued regulations and just waiting for implementation, right? So what we are seeing is a very vibrant world, financial ecosystem, global financial ecosystem that is moving towards these trends.
You would agree with that, Jose Luis? What do you think?
Well, I think it's too early. I
Yeah.
think now every single country that is regulating the baby steps, the open banking, maybe open finance, and each one of those regulations it's costing a lot to move and to compromise the banks, and also for the ecosystems to understand that. So I think the future is the open economy, but for reaching that or the open data, we will need a much mature, position than the one we have now. And actually, I have always a thought about this. So banks are used to be regulated, but who will regulate governments or telcos or every other segment, because they are not used to be regulated on the data, right?
Right.
So it looks like your data in my bank is for you to use, but your data in a telco is not for you to use. Okay, and who's going to solve that problem? So I think it's part of a bigger picture, and we will need first to show that all the open banking, open finance is really working really well,
Right.
and then maybe other areas will begin to adopt the changes.
Right. So it's still a year. So a lot of work then for Horizon Zero, Heather, in just demonstrating the potential of where this could go. David, what about with the tech? You know, we normally turn to you for some of the technical or technology questions. The technology is there for this sort of stuff, isn't it? For moving towards an open economy.
Technology is not a problem here. You know, as my colleagues has mentioned, technology is ready, but this is about regulation. This is about many other things rather than technology. You know, we are from some time ago. We are technology ready for building ecosystem. AI will boost. AI will boost also the power of ecosystems because of data. You know, artificial intelligence relies on data. Data are spread over the ecosystem. You will need APIs, cloud technologies to be able to take that data and do many things with them. But how? Regulation is here the stopper, and I must say that it should be the stopper. We need a stable context and landscape to start doing things. You know, if things are not, you know, if there are too many concerns about security, privacy, whatever, you know, innovation will fail because you are not boosting innovation. You cannot, because you don't know under which conditions, you know. So yeah, I think that technology is not a problem here. It won't be anymore. But we have a regulation. I wouldn't say problem, but topic. I think that this is good.
Okay, yep, great. So when we look globally, there is when we look globally, there's 124 countries that are doing a market-driven approach to open banking regulations, and 70 that have an open banking regulation in place. So that's about a third of the world's countries now have open banking regulations in place. But on top of that, we're seeing that for the market-driven companies, they're thinking about some open banking as well. So, you know, probably the big players, United States and Canada, out of that are allowing just market to drive these things. They're also talking about what Pepe was mentioning about the need for clarity around the data sharing aspect, which is new in those sorts of market-driven countries to be looking at that. But yeah, that would need to be replicated in telcos, energy, a whole range of other sectors for the open economy to grow. In a range of other countries, it's sort of planned on the agenda, and then in still more countries, it's sort of just starting to be discussed as well. Do you think out of these countries, anyone got an opinion as far as how many of these? So we're seeing what's this 5, 7, another 8 or something here. So we're seeing about 20 countries thinking about it. How many more of those will come on board? So when we say there's 100, when we say there's 69 at the moment globally, do we think it'll get to 80 by the end of the year? Is that too high?
Yeah, so if we see the map, it is getting more color with the open banking colors, right? And I see that will increase, and I think that will increase because, for example, if we see America, the continent, Brazil, for example, has already implemented their open finance framework, but Chile and Colombia are very, very close to finishing their secondary regulation. And then obviously the implementation. Mexico has already a law that enables open finance. The secondary regulation is still in progress. It has been a slow process, but we will get there. And the United States and Canada, very likely this year, will publish some kind of rules, right? So we will see that side of the world will be in its majority colored, no, with the open banking color, which was the pink color.
Right.
In the case of Europe, basically Europe is an open banking regulated market, right? And in other regions like Asia, it's very interesting, the models, some of the models that we find there, because, for example, there are countries that the authorities make available, like South Korea, makes available an open banking system so the participants to connect theirs, right? So, so we will see different approaches and different ways of implementation. And but I definitely think that maybe next year this map will look different, more color with the open banking color.
Right. Anyone else? Heather, what are you seeing in your work when you've been with Standard Chartered? They were trying to push on open banking in regions that didn't have regulations. They've got one of the best developer portals, which I'm sure is part of the legacy that you've left behind. And then also through your work in open banking implementation entity, and then the open banking new group out of the UK, you were watching regulations globally. What's your view of where regulations are going, and where will they be by the end of the year?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I think I would like to add a bit of nuance I observe between the regulatory and the market-driven innovation. Because, like, for example, take UK, for example, is a strong regulatory-driven market, right? However, especially from my scene last year, just by regulatory push is not good enough, because what happened is that like take ERP for example, the variable recurring payment, and the regulatory like FCA, PSR, they have been doing a lot of really good job and working, and JR working with the ecosystem with OBL and the TPPs to push it forward. However, how do we agree on the funding model? How do we agree on the liability model and business model? And that need the consensus or need the agreement from all of the parties. So, but just by regulatory trying to push without the ecosystem collaboration and consensus is actually quite challenging to progress that any further quickly. So I agree that we need very clear regulatory mandate and driven policies, which is a really I think is a must. But at the same time, I feel between regulatory push and also the market innovation, there needs to be a handshake of all of the players, so that it will advance further. So I think it's maybe like a third element of the collaboration in addition to the regulatory and the market-driven approach.
Right. That's interesting. And something actually, let's jump to, we're seeing this a little bit in how standards are being done. So here we look at a number of different open banking standards globally. And okay, Berlin Group, large numbers because of Europe. What's hidden here with the Financial Data Exchange, which is the US and Canada standard, is actually that's the number of API of banks that are providers, but unfortunately it hides a little bit of their numbers because there's some intermediaries who use the FDX standard, and then a lot of the mid-sized banks use those intermediaries. So that sort of hides that, which is why it's important to also look at this bottom graph, and you can see the number of households using digital services that are powered by a API standard. And here you can see for FTX, it's quite high. But there is this issue of so what we're seeing in the data is, yes, regulations create the innovation ecosystem opportunities, but standards is where where stakeholders are collaborating and learning how to work together. So that, at times they have got a competitive commercial arrangement. Other times they've got a collaborative, coordinating, working together sort of relationship, and that sort of standards is where they work together to learn that sort of how to speak to each other. Is that something that you're seeing as well, Heather?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's spot on. Yeah, standards is actually I also think it's a big enabler to help the two to work together. Like for example, trust framework. So in the UK, for example, last year we discussed a very long time about how trust framework should work, and for example, like for trust framework to be either adopted by the industry as a competitive product or provided centrally. What's the North Star for it? So I would, go to what you just described, the standardized. So the product to say, what's the minimal threshold for the risk mitigation? What's the minimal standard for the level of trust to be established? And these standards will really, I think, will help the regulatory and the market to reach to the optimum status.
Right. Pepe, how are you seeing this play out? Because you work across a number of regions, or you're regularly in connection, aren't you? Spain, some areas in South America that Mariana mentioned, US. How do you balance understanding the regulations in each of those environments and then understanding the standards and bringing it all together?
Well, that's a really deep question.
Yeah.
Good and deep.
3 minutes, go.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I will try my best. So I totally agree that the way to move forward is about having standards and having a trust framework, okay? And that's what we say. We have been talking, like you say, Mark, to regulators in Latin America, in Central America, and discussing with them, don't really copy everything from the PSD2, don't really copy everything from the UK, because you have to learn from the mistakes that both systems have, right? And one of them is trying to over-regulate the situation. So we really recommend that having standards, having a trust framework, and letting space to the business, because this doesn't work if there is no business. So the regulators have to look at the banks, at the ecosystem, like Heather said, because they are the ones saying what products do we want. And actually the products that the banks want to offer are those that the end customer wants to use. So we have to look each one at the other, the regulator at the ecosystem, and the ecosystem at the customer. So in the end, don't force me, for example, to do only account aggregation and payment initiation, because if you check the numbers, they are not as universally used as it was thought when the PSD2 started. So that's our message to regulators. For example, in Colombia, say, okay, Colombia, try to do something in the middle, in the market-driven and regulatory, because that where the, how to say, the innovation occurs. If you are too over-regulated, you don't innovate. You just comply. There is a compliance, but no innovation. So the innovation occurs when there is the possibility of business. And there is possibility of business when there is a customer need. So you have to put all of that in the equation.
Right. Thanks. And David, you've worked before on really arguing this point about user-centered design and understanding customer needs before you think about what technologies to implement and all of the rest, haven't you? What would be, so when you're looking at working with bank clients, how do you approach supporting them to make use of APIs, but also keep the customer at the front of their thoughts?
Yeah, I think that we customers, what we expect as customers are hyper-personalization. We need things quick, and we need what we really want. So what this means? This means that banks or any organization has to deal with huge amounts of data. They will use also artificial intelligence to process those data, and they will need a huge use of APIs, both to provide omnichannelity, but also to provide that kind of personalization. You need to get those data, process them. So data are spread, I mentioned before. So the APIs are the best way of integrating everything in a single pack to be able to provide those hyper-personalization services. Hyper-personalization is not only about which device or how I want to contact to the provider, the bank, or to the insurance, or to the whatever, but also doing quick, I think.
Right. Yeah. And then out of that, then if there's the level of if there is that sort of focus more on hyper-personalization and the customer use cases, then then out of that could be new business models, new digital business models emerging for banks that then helps them drive the innovation. We were talking a bit offline before the start of this podcast, and I was saying that what we're seeing from some banks is they have started work on the open banking, and maybe this relates to your point, Pepe, around because they had to start with the payments and the account aggregation and account information, and maybe that's not where the innovation opportunity was. So there wasn't that huge pickup in open banking that everyone sort of expected. Maybe UK a little bit, definitely Brazil, but the rest of the world, it's not been a huge splash until we look at the stuff from this year or the end of last year into this year, where we're seeing now there's growing open banking, API calls being made at each bank and all of that. So they're seeing the growth, they're seeing these business models start to generate revenue or start to generate new partnerships. Has that come too late for some banks who've already felt like, oh, okay, we tried this and nothing happened? And yet now this year, even though it's sort of growing, they've already moved on in their thinking, or is there time now to come back and sort of really think about the open banking opportunity? Heather, what are you seeing this play out, or have you heard from some banks around there's that fatigue internally and the API team still trying to advocate for new opportunities?
Yeah, Mark, that's a really interesting question. This term come to me that I felt like what's it called? Necessity is the mother of invention. So
Right.
yeah, so I heard that, like, for example, in Southeast Asia, like in the Philippines, and the open banking adoption is impressively high. And what's the reason for it? From the statistic I saw from some other experts, that about 60 plus of population consumer, they were unbanked unbanked. So the high percentage unbanked customers, and open banking actually creates this means real for the customers to really gain benefit with the open banking payment, and that makes the banks who adopted later even to accelerate faster than the early adopters. So I think maybe in Brazil, there's because Brazil has been such an impressive open banking, open finance player, and also they apply to the customer needs as their North Star, and I think that helped them as well to accelerate.
What about thanks, Pepe? What about what you're seeing? Was there a little bit of the energy around the opportunity of open banking going down, and that you've had to say, but look, it's happening now? Everyone's like, oh, you told us that 2 years ago.
No, I mean, the opportunity, I would like to specify, okay? More than open banking, the opportunities for open finance. This is how we feel it. And the banks, and you talk about monetization before, are trying to get innovative about how to monetize open finance. It's not always easy, and sometimes you just can monetize the channel. Okay, you connect to my channel, but you have these APIs. None of them is a regulatory one, because I told you before, is not where the need comes from the customers. And by customers, I'm even talking about the enterprises or SMEs, right? And we try to look in a broad sense on monetization. For example, if we sell a loan, that's already monetizing for me. Even I don't charge for the API, right? And one of the biggest mistakes that we see some of the banks are doing is thinking monetization is direct monetization of the API.
Yeah.
And that is really, really difficult.
Hmm.
Really difficult. For example, we use APIs to substitute host-to-host connections. And then that customer won't understand that you start charging for an API when for the host-to-host was already done and you didn't really charge that much. So how are you going to change that? I mean, it's not easy. You have to find each one of the cases, try to convince also your higher ups in the bank about what's really the value of open banking. And just for finishing, one of the values of open banking is not getting out of the picture. So if you don't have the API, someone else will, and eventually the customers will flock to that one. So you will get out of the business, and that actually, which is really important, but it's not really how to say fancy KPI to talk to your higher ups, but it's really important for the bank to remain in the business.
So to demonstrate, yeah. Sorry,
Mark,
yeah.
I would like to add that also what we are seeing in the trends is that many premium APIs in regulatory countries, they are creating premium APIs for which they can charge, right? So I think that it is important in the regulations for that there will be the possibility for companies to charge for the APIs usage. So I think that Europe is a good example of, these APIs are the basics that you need to use, and you will not charge for this, but any others you can charge. And actually in Europe there has been published a pricing document, no? So I think it is important for regulators to consider that.
You're right, but I won't really like regulators to meddle in the pricing. So
No.
They should make sure that you are not overcharging. So they may have a frame, but let the market put the price. Let the market set the demand. So it's about the market. If nobody wants it, you won't charge it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Regulator
Agree.
has to provide a trust framework, but the
Yes.
market has to be, the behavior of the market, it has to be rolled by itself.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I think at least it can be when it's going to be regulatory driven, at least regulators need to enable the possibility of charging, no? Now the market will decide, but at least it should, there should be the possibility by the authorities that this can be charged, this service can be charged for its usage.
Whereas at the moment, there's somewhere, the account information and the payments, it says you cannot charge for those for retail customers, for example. Yeah.
No, but for the usage for the TPPs, I mean, not the customers.
Right.
No?
Yeah.
And I'd like to add to Jose's point that perhaps it's not the direct commercialization, it's more of the indirect commercialization that needs to the benefit of the banks. And maybe same as APIs. So banks now more and more, I think, see APIs as a channel rather than a product itself. And open banking can be also seen as a channel. So then channel can lead to further discovery of the bank's core product, and then commercialization can come from there as well.
You're right. We think in BBVA, we think of open banking like a new channel. So you're totally right.
Okay, cool. Rather than, that whole product thinking, which product means pricing the product, and instead seeing it as one of your channels to reach to new customer markets that you weren't possibly reaching before. We see that in some banks, they've got a sort of loan pre-approval or a fast track loan approval sort of API, and they offer that for free to particular retailers, and it may be very specific, like an electric bike or a electric car loan approval API, and the banks then are offering that to free for retailers in the bikes and car retailer space. So they're integrating it. It's all the cost of the business to integrate, but it's driving new loan customers to the bank. So so in that way it is revenue generating, but not direct, and then it's not a cost for the retailers who are using that API other than their own API integration.
Yeah, precisely. And actually, if the company or the partner is too big, he may ask for some money instead. So it's not about that you get money from him, but he will say you, okay, I want some profit sharing of the numbers of number of customers and so forth. So that I told you is the market that has to regulate itself.
I would love to see that. I mean, that's part of that ecosystem approach on our, we're watching very closely at the moment, as at least those who have documented publicly, there's not any that are using this revenue share here on the second row at the right, where there's a revenue share going back to those partners. I'm sure there's some of those deals that we don't see because they're just partnership deals rather than public, but I'd love to see this number go up, because it shows the value of open banking as far as all stakeholders generate and distribute the value, and it builds up for everyone.
Yeah.
Let's just finish. We've got a few minutes, so let's just quickly talk about the consumer choice. We've talked about the banks and some of the ecosystem players. Here we can see, and it is skewed because, the regulations often insist on the account information and payments. So we can see that those are the two biggest areas where there's apps being built for open banking, but using open banking APIs. But here you can see, lending comes up big. Some of the trust framework stuff is starting to move, and there's some of these other areas, real estate, insurance, business operations, they're sort of growing a little bit from the use of API infrastructure. Do you think customers are getting more consumer choice now from open banking and more options? Anyone want to jump in?
I think that the more options you give to the customers, the better, but only at some point, because customers what want is really to get services. So if they don't mind if the provider is X or Y or Z or whatever, what they want or what we want as customers is to get our service product quick and cheap.
Right.
Well, I agree with David. I think the demand from the customers for APIs is passive, and is growing passively. So it's just that every one of us is getting used to perform certain banking transactions without the bank, right? I always put example about like when you pay a streamer, not that I do because for my age I'm not a streamer guy, but when you are watching some live spectacle and you want to pay that guy, you like to pay from that app you are using and not going to the bank apps and then send up. So and that's really passive demand. So they don't know there is an API behind.
Mm.
They don't know
Yeah.
it,
Right.
but they get used to it.
I think that adoption from the customer might be right now a little low because in the end, the mindset needs to change at every level, and that customers understand that now they are in charge of their data and they can decide who to share it with. But so, however, we see that adoption is increasing. For example, in the UK, and correct me if I'm wrong, Heather, but 1 in 7 customers now have used open banking to do payments, for example. And yesterday I learned a very impressive figure that in the USA, 63% of consumers would consider switching bank if their bank could not connect to fintech apps, right?
Wow.
So that gives us an idea of how customers are switching to these digital services.
I agree, Mariana, because for example, in the UK, the payment really has doubled year on year, and so that's very impressive. And and also the statistics and on the like VRP, the sweeping VRP is hugely growing as well. I definitely see growth, and also from your analysis. By the way, that's amazing analysis. Thank you. I really love it. It looks like the use case is growing from payment into more of open finance space, isn't it? Like into lending, insurance, and that's I felt that's because that's what the customer needs, and that they need the use case to support their day-to-day financial lives. And maybe that leads to more growth, and as we expand more into open finance as well.
Fantastic. That's a nice. Oh yeah.
I would like to add just to what Mariana and Heather was just talking about. A lot of these open finance use cases, they don't need the consent from the customer. So I agree with them that when the use case needs the consent and needs the customer to understand that he is giving access to his or to her data from the bank, there is a barrier there, and it's difficult to pass it, okay? Because we don't have yet the maturity for that model. But for example, we offer loans and we don't need you to consent. Because
Right.
actually, like you are somewhere else, and in reality, is the final customer which is giving their data, but through the API. But you are not requesting data, or he's not giving you access to the data. So they are easier, or they are use cases easier to use and to understand from the customer right now.
Right. So then, yeah. So the idea that that trust framework doesn't come into play as much as far as like really getting the customers' data literacy up to know about the data sharing and agreeing to all of that sort of thing. That doesn't have to come into play when it's a more simple connection for meeting with the bank where they are.
but it's still contextual. That means that the customer is performing some financial service from a third party.
That other website or that other app or the streaming platform, so on. Yep. Okay, cool. Let's wrap up. We've got just a couple minutes left. What about, so the rest of this year, this final conversation led us back to thinking about an open economy and the use of data again. So where do you think things will be at by December 2024? Anyone want to jump in first with a bold prediction?
Yes, I mean, from the regulatory perspective, I think that we will see in America, in this side of the world, we will see more regulations issued and moving for implementation.
Fantastic. Thanks. We've got you on record now for saying that Mariana will check the numbers at the end of the year.
Okay. Crossing my fingers.
Who wants to go next? Heather, what do you think? How's the rest of this year going to play out?
I think, I think it will be a big year this year. It is a big year for regulatory. So from America, there are new open banking rules, and by end of this year, the banks has to reach to the target. And so I presume there will be could be some challenges to be resolved during this journey. And then in the UK, there has been a lot of progress so far, like, for example, the roadmap for smart data and also the open banking, the JROC report asking the future entity to be created. And so there are a lot of big steps to go through. But because of the current pending the general election, it means that the DPDI bill, so the bill for the smart data and a few other open banking related regulations, has been kind of put to pause with some uncertainty. So we hope that this period we can get through quite quickly, and then things will start moving fast again soon. And then in the rest of the world, and Jose and David and Mark and Mary, you can comment on. I feel there are a lot of going on in the regulatory world as well.
Right, thank you. Anything on, anyone want to comment on growing use cases or consumer opportunities? David?
No, I just want to remark what they have said. I think that this is going to be a good year. Don't know if the best year, but it's going to be a good year. And let's see what happens. It's going to be fun for sure. So
Right. Yep. We're in for a ride. Pepe, do you want to round us up? Where do you see the bulk of the work for the end of the year?
No, I think, like, at least in South America, there's a lot of regulations already growing and evolving, so that will continue that way. I think in Europe we are a little bit stuck because we are waiting for the PSD3, the FIDA, and that will take still like a couple of years. So in the meantime, I think banks are just following the route they have previously stated. Okay,
right.
So actually I'm from a bank, so if you tell me what do I think will happen at the end of the year, I will say that it's Christmas, because 6 months for a bank, you can expect too many things happening. But I can tell you from our case now, jokes aside, that we are increasing the offering, and we are thinking out of the box on what kind of products can we offer. So and actually not only for end customers or retail customers, but also for enterprise and SMEs. And we try to see what are the most immediate need, and it could be request to pay, it could be conciliation, it could be and so forth, and actually elaborating on those use cases because they are proven to have interest from customers.
Excellent. Yep. Fantastic. Thank you all, and thanks for being part of our first season. Thanks everyone who's watching. from Open Finance Successes. This is the end of our season 1. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank
Ciao.
you. A
Bye
pleasure.
bye.